With the war in Ukraine raging on, Russia appears to have a new ally. North Korean leader Kim Jong Un's visit to his neighbour this month could signal a boost for Russia's military arsenal. So just how worried should Ukraine and Europe be? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. As it pummels Ukrainian towns and cities, Russia is reportedly burning through artillery much faster than it can produce it. So could North Korea be poised to fill the gap? And what's it likely to get in return?
When Kim Jong Un rolled into Vladivostok in his armoured train earlier this month, many observers saw it as the start of a new phase in Russia-North Korea relations. And possibly not a moment too soon for Moscow as it continues its war in Ukraine.
The Russian army and people will certainly win a great victory in the sacred struggle for the punishment of a great evil that claims hegemony and feeds an expansionist delusion.
Though Russia and North Korea didn't sign any formal deals during Kim's visit, many analysts say Moscow is seeking a big boost to its artillery supplies as it strikes Ukrainian targets. According to unidentified Western officials quoted by Reuters, Russia fired between 10 and 11 million rounds at Ukraine last year. Those officials say Russia may be able to double its production in the next couple of years to about 2 million rounds a year. But that is still far short of what Russia needs. And that's where North Korea may be able to help. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute estimates that North Korea may have tens of millions of artillery shells in stock. In return, North Korea may be eager to get its hands on more sophisticated military hardware, including fighter jets and long-range missile technology. So does Vladimir Putin's attempt to reach out to Kim signal desperation on Russia's part? Or does it show that despite the West's best attempts, Russia still has friends it can count on?
Well, we've got an excellent panel on this today. Let's meet our guests. Joining us from Seoul is Daniel Pinkston, former Deputy Project Director for Northeast Asia at the International Crisis Group. He's currently a lecturer in international relations at Troy University, Korea. In Washington, D.C. is Mark Kimmitt, former U.S. Army Brigadier General and former Assistant Secretary of State to President George W. Bush. And Amanda Paul is a Senior Policy Analyst in the Europe in the World programme at the European Policy Centre. She joins us from Brussels. Mark, I want to come to you first. The meeting between Putin and Kim, was this very significant or was just posturing, just for show to the West?
Well, the U.S. view is it wasn't very interesting. It wasn't very important. These are two longstanding allies. Obviously, President Putin needs more ammunition to continue his fight in Ukraine. But that's about the only part of interest that the U.S. saw in this meeting between the two.
You're not in any way concerned that Putin is reaching out to someone who could supply him with more ammunition for the war in Ukraine?
Well, we certainly are. Any ally of President Putin that can continue to sustain the illegal invasion of Ukraine gives us pause. But the only good news and bright spot on this is the number of allies he has is so few that soon they'll run out as well.
Daniel, I want to come to you. Was this a meeting, do you think, primarily designed for foreign audiences? You got two pariah states flexing their muscles, both desperate for global attention?
Well, I don't think it's just for attention, but I think their interests align in many ways. They're both revisionist states. They're dissatisfied with the international system or the rules of the international system. They have grievances against the West. They're displeased with the economic system, with the security architecture, both in Europe and in East Asia. So there are a lot of areas they can cooperate for their mutual gain, which will be to the detriment of the rest of the world, or most of the rest of the world.
Amanda, what's your reading of the meeting? Is there a big fear in Europe that this is Vladimir Putin trying to top up munitions and weapons to keep grinding out the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, I don't think there's a huge concern at the moment, but there's definitely some concern. And for the exact reason that you just mentioned, Putin is struggling to sort of bring the weapons that he needs domestically, and he needs to get this from somewhere else. So he's reaching out to pariah states, and the result is that a war that could potentially finish much quicker will be dragged on and on in this attritional form that it's currently shaping over a long period of time, thanks to the pariah state support that is being given to Russia.
I want to read to you all a quote from the US ambassador to the European Union, Mark Gittenstein is his name. In a recent interview with Euronews, he said, "For Putin to go to North Korea for arms is an indication that our strategy is working. Our export controls and sanctions have just knocked his military back to the 19th century. So he's going to another country he would never go to otherwise to get military equipment. To me, it's an indication of Putin's failure and our success." Mark, what do you make of that thought?
Well, I find the comments by the ambassador a bit flamboyant. It is certainly not the case that President Putin's military has been pushed back to the 19th century. Both sides have been pushed back to early 20th century type of warfare, which is primarily trench warfare, heavily augmented by artillery. As was said, this will perhaps extend the war for quite some time, but I don't think that necessarily florid opinion expressed by the U.S. ambassador to the EU is anywhere near reality.
And tell me, Daniel, do you think this was a meeting that kind of, the two of them are just so desperate? The North Koreans want the space technology and perhaps food aid, and the Russians need artillery shells. Do you think this was a situation they were forced into? Because let's be frank here, they hadn't seen each other in 4 years.
Well, of course, there was the pandemic. And people are concerned here in Northeast Asia because of the wish list that Kim Jong Un has. Nuclear submarine technology, space technology, nuclear technology, and so forth. UAV technology, aircraft technology. But people ask and are doubtful about the transfers because what does Russia get out of it? What can North Korea give for this technology? So they can give labor, and I think there are other intangible things and abstract things that North Korea can provide, such as information on circumventing sanctions, money laundering, how to run underground network smuggling operations. They can be partners in subversion, and they have a larger goal of just undermining the Western rules-based liberal order. So it goes beyond Ukraine. Putin's project is about overturning the world order. Kim has similar designs in Northeast Asia. So I think they will find some ways to cooperate. But the good news is that they act opportunistically. They can't make credible commitments, and they're actually poor, partners.
Amanda, do you feel the US ambassador was right in what he said, that sanctions are starting to bite, the strategy is working, and the Russian military basically needs as much help it can get, and Putin is not picky about where he gets it from?
I mean, I think that sanctions are starting to bite, but perhaps not as much as the ambassador would actually like them to. I mean, the Russians are far from done here. They can keep going for a very long time, and we need to be clear about this. So perhaps he was a bit over enthusiastic in some of his comments. At the end of the day, Putin will go to anyone who is ready to sell him the military equipment or the raw materials that he needs to keep his war going. Rather than focusing so much on what Putin is doing, the West and the Americans should be focusing on what they need to be doing, which is supplying Ukraine with much more military hardware and doing it much quicker, and really giving Ukraine the things that it needs now in a speedy fashion. This should be the goal, because Putin will do whatever it takes to wipe Ukraine off the map. The West needs to be doing whatever it takes to stop Putin from doing that.
Mark, we know the United States has done a huge amount already. Would you agree with what Amanda has said, that perhaps there's even more the Biden administration could be doing?
Well, in my personal view, I think there is. There is a mismatch at this point in the Western strategy and Zelensky's strategy, for that matter. If you look at the ends, the ways, and the means, the ends are quite clear for President Zelensky. Removal of all Russian soldiers and restoration of the territorial integrity of Ukraine. But if you look at the means and the ways, they simply are insufficient at this point to achieve those victory/war termination conditions that he's looking for. So there is much more the West can do, but they have been self-deterring themselves by the fact that they are continually concerned about a threat of nuclear warfare, which many of us believe is certainly not true.
Mark, how much support is there on the ground amongst the ordinary American population for the war in Ukraine, for supporting Zelensky and the people of Ukraine?
Remarkably, I don't think I've seen such support among the U.S. population for any type of conflict, candidly, except for the U.S. operations in Iraq initially, in my lifetime. You go up and down the streets, the Ukrainian flags are still waving from the rooftops. And I think that as long as the president can continue to make the case of how important this war is, not only to Ukraine, but to the rules-based order, I think he's going to be able to maintain this support for quite some time.
And Mark, what happens if Donald Trump wins your next election? Will that support change?
I'm not necessarily sure it'll support change among the American population. It will certainly support change among President Trump and his administration. Many people believe that President Putin is trying to buy time precisely for a re-election of Donald Trump, where he knows he can strike a deal and it won't be to Ukraine's ultimate objectives. It will be probably turning this into a frozen conflict at best, and something even more dire for the Ukrainians at worst.
Well, let's take a look at what North Korea has to offer Russia and Vladimir Putin. Kim Jong Un is thought to be sitting on a large supply of artillery shells and rockets that work with Soviet-era weapons. North Korea also produces shells based on Russian designs. They have a network of over 100 munitions factories. Katyusha rockets, heavy artillery shells, and bullets are some of the supplies Russia could be looking for. Daniel, do you think Kim will leverage all of that in the private discussions away from the cameras, this was what was discussed?
Well, I'm sure it was discussed, and broad areas of military and security cooperation were discussed. But as I understand it and what I've read is that Kim will provide his older stocks, the old stockpiles of weapons. There's a higher failure rate. And, I don't think it's going to be sufficient to really turn the tide of the war for the Russians. They'll take whatever they can get. The fact they have to turn to the North Koreans is a sign of, I wouldn't say desperation, but of dire need. So North Korea can do other things for them as well. They could cooperate in information warfare, causing problems in Northeast Asia to divert the world's attention or divert the U.S. and its allies over here. So if they have to flow resources here. So they can cause a lot of problems and chaos through cooperative efforts. And that would work to the benefit of Putin.
Amanda, what did you make of the optics of all of this? I mean, we've seen Putin, during COVID in particular, sit people at the end of a very, very, very long table, not make them very welcome. He did this to Macron. And yet for Kim Jong Un, he's prepared to travel to quite a remote region of Russia, make that journey, meet him in person, greet him, a banquet, lavish food and wine. What do you make of the difference between how he greets different leaders?
I mean, I think for the North Korean leader, I mean, Putin really rolled out the red carpet. Putin wants to show that he's still, has some, pulling power or influential on the world stage, that he's still able to get support, even if it's from pariah states. But obviously, there's a big difference between, North Korea and France. He's tried to intimidate or belittle the French president, among others. It's just a very small man trying to act in a macho way, using intimidation as a sort of tool to achieve his bigger objectives. I mean, he's failed this time. In the past, I think there has been many situations where Putin's tactics of intimidation have actually worked. This time, the West has stood up. France, Germany, in particular, it's brought about a change of policy. So now he can only have the likes of Kim sitting at his table.
Daniel, you've studied North Korea for a long time. What do we make of seeing someone like Kim Jong Un in his luxury train, all the lavish food, the fine wines, discussing rocket technology with the Russians, and back home in North Korea, many of his people are starving?
That's right. That's the tragedy of authoritarian regimes. A huge misallocation of resources. The leadership has almost no domestic constraints on their behavior. They can squeeze the resources out of the nation state that they need. That's how North Korea, with a small, impoverished economy, has been able to develop nuclear weapons and long-range delivery systems, space launchers, and so forth. But it comes at a great cost for the people. So that's what these types of leaders can do, and it's demonstrated again and again.
Mark, how much of an incentive is the space technology that the Russians have? The North Koreans have great ambition, but they've never really been able to achieve anything because they're decades behind everyone else. How much of an incentive do you think it is for Kim Jong Un to be able to offer what he's obviously offering to Putin in return for getting that technology so that he can turbocharge his missile capabilities?
Well, I think you're saying the same thing that Daniel said earlier, which is that the big winner out of this conference was President Kim. It's not just space technology he's looking for, it's truly intercontinental ballistic missile capability that he's looking for. They have a very robust rocket program, but when you go from rocket to missile technology, he is a bit behind in capability, although he's improving quick. And as Daniel correctly noted, because of the sanctions, he's probably not going to get the physical technology that he's looking for, but he'll certainly get some pretty good personal technology with smart Russian scientists coming over trying to solve many of the problems that he's experienced to date with some of his intercontinental capabilities.
Do you think it was significant, the location, that they met at this spaceport, Russia showing him all the technology? Kim looked like a schoolboy at Christmas. He looked extremely excited in some of the photographs we saw.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And he is probably excited because what he was seeing was some of the solutions to the challenges that his missile technology and his missile program has been having. So it's almost as you're bringing a young fat kid coming into the candy factory and enjoying himself and seeing there's exactly what he wants. Whether it's good for him or not is another story entirely.
Amanda, what did you think of Kim keeping Putin waiting 30 minutes? I mean, is this a sign of how diminished Putin's standing now is, that someone like him is able to think that he can basically keep someone waiting for that length of time?
I think it's a trend that we're seeing more and more. I mean, President Erdogan has definitely kept Putin waiting for at least 30 minutes. And given Putin's diminished role in global affairs these days, and how desperate he is for any sort of cooperation or close friendship, I guess that's a sort of liberty even these types of guys can take now, because Putin really needs the cooperation with Kim.
Daniel, what do you make of all of this, the relationship between the two of them? We've seen all the pictures. Is there actually a good, positive relation? We see world leaders who get on, famously Tony Blair and George W. Bush, you know, a so-called bromance at the time. Do these two guys genuinely get on, or is it just a marriage of convenience almost?
Well, I can only speculate about that. It's probably a little bit of both. But the barriers to cooperation that these types of regimes have are difficult to overcome and difficult to sustain. So that requires this close relationship and cooperation between the leaders. So we'll have to see how it plays out. Kim invited Putin to North Korea. He accepted. That's supposed to happen pretty soon. So if they can begin these step-by-step cooperative measures, then it can sustain itself. There are a number of smaller pieces and small steps they can take. So when we talk about space cooperation, for example, people think of satellites or giving them all of the technology for reconnaissance satellite. But some things they can do is just give data. They can give tracking data. They can invite North Koreans to Russian ground stations where they could track a constellation of satellites that they might put up in the years ahead. Nuclear reactor design for nuclear propulsion. Kim mentioned this many times in the press and North Korean press. The submarine they just launched recently is the diesel submarine. They want nuclear propulsion. So that's very complicated technology. Maybe the Russians can help them with that. And those submarines don't have to surface. They can stay out for months, and then they would have the ability to strike the U.S. and other targets far away. So we'll see if they can sustain this. There are barriers to it, but we can't completely dismiss it.
Mark, there was a quote put out by the North Koreans at the end of the visit saying that Kim Jong Un backs Russia in what he called its sacred fight against the West and Ukraine. What was your reading of that? Very strange use of language.
But he's been using that same language against South Korea. And again, as Daniel mentioned, the whole Western rules-based order system. Hard to compare him with Erdogan, but Erdogan continues to use this term bigger than five, meaning that the world is bigger than the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. And it is this notion that Kim has that he is standing up to the international order, and everybody eventually, if they understand what the true socialism means as it's practiced inside of North Korea, that it's an eventuality that the world will return to that system of government which Kim, in his own delusion, believes it's the right way to go. That is his sacred mission.
Amanda, when we're dealing with two extremely secretive states and pariah leaders, will we ever know officially if a deal was done?
I mean, honestly, I think it's very difficult to know that for sure. This is not the first time. It hasn't been clear what's actually come out of conversations. I mean, the visit of the Chinese president to Moscow some months ago, I don't think anybody is still 100% clear of all the details or agreements that came out of that gathering. And in this situation, given the nature of the North Korean regime, it's even more difficult. We'll only know for sure when things are put into action on the battlefield. Then we can have a better idea of what has actually been done, at least in terms of the sort of military and industrial base assistance that the North Korean leader has given to or will give to Moscow.
Daniel, a return invite has been issued by the North Koreans. We know Putin has been extremely reluctant to travel in recent years. Do you think he'll take them up on it and go? Probably.
I mean, again, we can only speculate about that. I think how this will play out, though, is that there will be smaller steps initially and see if both sides can deliver, and then they can move on to bigger things. And if they are both able to accrue, mutual gains from their perspective, then they will move on to bigger things. So along the way with those steps requires, the leader signing off on many of those steps. So they could do a lot of things. I mean, they could invite North Korean pilots to air bases in Russia, in the Russian Far East, and do pilot training, give them fuel. They can give them data and information about UAVs and surveillance in the drone warfare that's been evolving in Ukraine. A lot of things that they could start with these initial small steps and then move on to the bigger things. So if it's going well, then maybe Putin will show up in Pyongyang. We'll just have to wait and see.
Mark, my final question to you. The previous meeting in 2019 ended up being completely fruitless. Do you think this will all blow over, the headlines will go away, and nothing much will come out of all of this?
Oh, I think many things will come out of this, and I think the real metric will, if we start seeing a significant number of ammunition trains coming across the Siberian Peninsula and elsewhere, if we see that ammunition heading west towards Ukraine, I think that's our major fear, and that would be, for us, the major significance of what this meeting turned out.
Daniel, Mark, Amanda, thank you all for your insight here on Roundtable. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.